Hey everybody, this is Barry Johns. Welcome back to another edition of Studio Talk. If you're like me, you've gotten pretty excited about Apple's new M1 processor and the future that holds for us in the studio as well as for video editing. These computers are incredibly powerful. I mean, incredibly powerful. It's shocking how much power you can get for an entry-level computer, as an example like this MacBook Air. This is an entry-level MacBook Air that I bought mostly as a test. My older son's getting ready to go to college, or my second son, I should say, second from the oldest, is getting ready to go to college. So I plan to give this one a try, or that Mac a try, just to see what this new, all the fuss was about these new Macs. And I have to tell you, it's completely blown away. You know, I've got a Mac Pro back there, a 12-core Mac Pro that I've been using in my studio for years. It's served me incredibly well. But it's time to go to the next generation. You know, it's limited on the level of OS you can use. So it's time to make that transition. So I plan to fully make that transition once Avid makes drivers for HD native Thunderbolt. So then I can transition over to the new M1 processor. Hopefully by then we'll have the second incarnation, whether it's the M1X or the M2 processor that is due to launch either later this fall, certainly M2 by next year. And that's when I'll buy a Mac Mini, and then I'll make that full transition, assuming that Avid has made their drivers by then, away from my Mac Pro onto this new technology, because it is unbelievably powerful. It's shocking how much power you can get for an entry-level computer. A lot of people try to compare, literally no pun intended, apples to apples with Intel, especially when it comes to memory, and they do not work the same way. You know, 8 gigabyte of memory on this is more like 32 or even higher. And of course, 16 to me feels more like 48 gigabyte of memory. And although in the audio world, that doesn't matter as much unless you're using a ton of samples that you've got to load into memory. But anyway, that's not what this is about. So one of the challenges with especially the MacBook Pro and the MacBook Air is it only has two USB/Thunderbolt ports on it. And that's simply just not enough to do the things that we need to be able to do. You know, with all the different peripherals and everything you ultimately need to keep. You know, I'm a big proponent of dual backups on everything. So if I've got an audio drive, I've got a separate drive to back that up to. If I have a sample drive, I've got a separate drive to back that up to. I do 2 redundancies on my OS drive. I do one a clone and one time machine. So I want to make sure that in case things go down, these very, very, very important files that I ultimately need access to, that I'm not going to lose those. So, you know, there's a couple of ways of expanding that. Before I say that, though, the Mac Mini has an additional port, I believe. I think it has 3, as well as the new iMac. I can't remember if that's got 2 or 3, but regardless, that number of ports is simply not going to be sufficient. So, you know, there's one way to do it. You know, there's a difference. And one of the things I want to explain today, the difference between something like a hub and then a dock. They are 2 very different things altogether. This is a hub as an example where you can see it's got various USB inputs on it. This is I think the blue one there is a 1.1. The others are like the version 2, whatever you call that, the next up. There's not USB 3 or 3.1. Then on the back of it, it's got a USB-C port, a port for SD cards, both sizes, and then, of course, mini display as well as HDMI on the out. So if you're just doing one SSD drive connected to this, along with some other minor peripherals, whether it's an iLock, a thumb drive, SD card, something like that, something like this will suffice for that. This is really made for when you're on the go, not necessarily when you're in your studio. You know, I have quite a few hard drives, and I'll talk about in a second when I jet over to the computer and kind of go over some things, another feature of what I'm about ready to talk about. But this particular device is the OWC dock that was specifically designed for the M1 Thunderbolt 3. Technically it says Thunderbolt 4, but I don't know if you know that or not, but there's no such thing yet as Thunderbolt 4. It's kind of marketing at this point. I'm sure it'll develop at some point. But what this is a powered unit. You have to plug this in and you get power on it. And so I have quite a few drives. I have old 7200 RPM drives, well, 5400 RPMs. You can drive, of course, you have an Ethernet connection. In the event you don't have that, you don't want to connect via Wi-Fi. You don't have that on the MacBook Air. or the MacBook Pro. It has multiple USB-C ports on it, as well as multiple 3.1 USB-C traditional, the old school style connectors on it. You also have audio in and out on there, or I should say audio out, I should say. You want to drive, a set of speakers or something like that. And then as well has USB 1.1, or I'm sorry, has USB 2.0 on the front of it. And then there's this 90 watt USB-C port right there. And that can actually power your MacBook Air or MacBook Pro at the same time it's connecting. So all of the throughput happens through that one cable. That it'll also, charge your MacBook Pro, your MacBook Air, as well as get all of the data back and forth between the various peripherals. And of course, it has a SD card slot reader on the front of it. So ultimately, these things are ultimately a godsend. When I go over to the computer, you'll see the drives that I have connected to it, and you'll see I've got quite a few. And for example, this is powered, so this can handle as many drives as you want to connect up to it, no problem whatsoever. I think this one is a larger. There's two sizes of this. This has more ports. I think this was around 259. The other one I think was 180, something like that. I'll actually pull that up on the screen to give you exact numbers. It's probably coming up over as we're talking about this, so I may be getting that completely wrong. But regardless, this has been absolutely flawless for me, and it works absolutely fantastic. So ultimately, if you want to be able to expand these new M1 processors, because they have limited ports on them, and you want to make sure you get maximum throughput between whatever devices you have connected. Most of it's going to be SSD drives or external hard drives that require quite a bit of throughput. So that's going to do a great job of it. And so ultimately, again, these are fantastic. These are hubs. This is not a dock, and there's a huge misconception out there between the two. There's a reason you get one of these for like $35, and then that one's a couple of $100. I've tried connecting two SSD drives to this at the same time, and it will not do it. You'll just lose connection on one, ultimately lose connection on both. It'll drive one, no problem, and it'll drive one and HDMI out, no problem. But then any other peripherals on there, you're going to start, any lightweight stuff, again, like thumb drives, SD cards, iLock, whatever that may be. This will work just fine. But the thing about this is this gets it away from your computer. I mean, using this, I just have this setting. You see my monitor back there. It just sets behind it, and all my peripherals are kind of hidden behind the scene, behind the monitor back there. And so you just don't see it. So all I've got is one cable coming from this to the laptop. Like I said, eventually, when they come out with the next incarnation, the M1X or M2 MacBook Mini, I plan to go to that. This MacBook Air here, this little bad boy right here, is actually more powerful on most things than my 12-core Mac Pro. It's just really unbelievable what you can get. I think you can get a Mac Mini for like $600, especially do refurbish or something like that, or like less than, I think it's $699, $700, which is unfreaking believable. This one I think is $1,000, but of course, if you're going to go with one of these, you need 512 SSD minimum. Although this is an 8 gigabyte, this will be fine for my son going to college, but I'll get more memory when I replace it with that Mac Mini, or ultimately the 27-inch iMac. I haven't decided. We'll see what that's got when it comes out, but these things are massively powerful, and they really are taking our studios to the next generation, to the next generation. Of course, it's that, but to the next level. These things are incredibly, incredibly powerful. They just work completely different than what we're used to with Intel processors, and RAM is not an apples to apples, no pun intended thing. 8 gigabyte of RAM on one of these is nothing like 8 gigabyte of RAM on an Intel processor. It's more the equivalent of double that. I've had zero issues with this. I edit multiple streams. Sometimes I do multicam work. For those that you don't know what that means I'll have 2-3 cameras all recording at the same time, all in 4K. And sometimes I'll do multiple audio streams. So picture if I got 3 cameras, 2 audio streams, just picture you've got 5 tracks in your DAW and you're mixing all those together. Well, I do that in Final Cut Pro. You may do it in DaVinci Resolve or Premiere Pro, depending on the video application that you use. But regardless, to be able to stream or play, I should say, 4K files at the same time, scrub back and forth, no lost frames, anything like that. That's incredibly hard to do on an Intel machine, even an i9 maxed out with like 32 gig of RAM. Of course, that's not maxed out, but I'm in the i9 maxed out. So these things are just unfreaking believably fast. And video editing, it's a game changer. I could not go back to editing video on an Intel processor ever again with how fast and how smooth these things are. But this is not about that. This is about the peripheral. So I strongly recommend especially if you end up with a MacBook Air or MacBook Mini for your studio. I'm sorry, MacBook Air or MacBook Pro for your studio, any type of laptop. You know, this unit right here, the OWC unit, to me is an absolute must-have. I think I've got that. Yeah, I've got that upside down. Sorry. This OWC is a must-have, in my opinion. Now, do you need the one with all the ports on it? You know, maybe you don't need that many. But for me, I'd pay the extra, 50, 60 bucks or whatever it is, and just have that option for going forward. Now, you can use multiple of those if you needed to, ultimately if you needed that many ports. But for those of us in the studio, we don't need that. If you edit video and things like that, those files are huge. And so you ultimately end up using quite a few peripherals, or not peripherals, but external hard drives if you're doing that. So you're not having to unplug constantly to change those out. So anyway, I strongly recommend this. It has been effortless for me. So let's take a quick trip over to the computer right now. Okay, so now we're back over at my computer, and so I wanted to show you one really cool feature of the OWC dock. This is especially true if you're using a laptop, either a MacBook Air or MacBook Pro. If you have a Mac Mini or the new iMac that have the M1 processors, this is probably not going to be that great of a feature for you because you're simply not going to need to disconnect the dock from those, hardly ever, to be honest with you. But if you have a laptop, this is quite handy, and so it just saves you a few steps. It's a nice little trick, and I want to show that to you so you understand. So let's go over to the computer here and take a look. So here you're going to see I've got quite a few different hard drives connected to the MacBook Air here via the OWC dock. And so some of these drives are drives that were taken from outside of my Mac Pro and then put in either external enclosures or some docking stations or hard drive docking stations so I could continue utilizing those drives until I ultimately replace them with SSD drives. But for what they are right now, they're perfect for that as well as backup drives. So what we have here is a 1 terabyte SSD drive that I use to edit all my video, including this one, eventually when I get around to it. And then here we have two 4 terabyte 7200 drives. One of them has my audio files on it from Pro Tools. The other has the sample files from both Trigger and Steven Slate Drums, Trigger, as well as Tune Track. So those are all on there, as well as my samples for my VIs. And so I, in other words, stream those that way. Then here I have an 8 terabyte 5400 drive that's used for backup. And then below that, I also have another 1.5 terabyte drive that I use. I believe in dual backups, so this one clones my hard drive, my system drive, so that in case something goes down, I've got that. And then below that, I have an old Lacy FireWire 800 drive that also connects via USB 1.1, and that's just a time machine backup. The drive's still working, no reason to not use it. So ultimately, I have two backups of my system drives in case I have a problem. I could probably do a whole video on redundancy for backing up and everything, but I'm not going to do that today. I actually have additional hard drives in my Mac Pro, which is down below. I haven't fully transitioned from that computer to this one yet, mainly because I'm on Pro Tools HD Native and they don't have Thunderbolt drivers quite yet for the new M1 processor. So once they do that, then I'll transition away from my Mac Pro, and then ultimately I'll connect these drives up to the back of the dock. So anyway, so if I want to take this laptop and go with it, ultimately, the ways I would do that is I could pull up Finder as an example, and then I could eject each hard drive one at a time that way. And so the other way, of course, doing it would be taking one of the drives and dragging it down to my trash as an example, and that would eject it that way. So there's a pretty cool feature they put in here. Again, this is not groundbreaking or ground shattering or anything, but it's nice to have it. And ultimately, if you go up here, you'll see this little blue eject button up here, and I can select that once and say eject volumes. And what it's going to do is one by one eject all of the drives connected to the dock. so that you don't have to do them individually. And it's going to make sure it completely safely does it so there's no question. So even though you see it pop off my screen there, it's continued to inject some of those slower drives. An example like that Lacey, see there, it just popped away. And so now that's gone. And so now I can just unplug the Thunderbolt or USB-C drive, or cable, I'm sorry, connected to my MacBook Air, and away I go. So anyway, that's a cool feature associated with it. So I hope you find that interesting. Okay, so hopefully you like that little kind of neat trick, let's say, of being able to eject all the drives at one time. And hopefully you got a chance to see the various hard drives that I have connected to my MacBook Air over there at the computer. And you can see how I utilize it for things like that. I do have one external monitor that drives it, that big one in the back right there. It takes two inputs. So one input goes down to my Mac Pro, the other input goes over to the OWC dock. And then, of course, I just switch between those two when I go back and forth, because I haven't made the transition for my studio completely from the Mac Pro. I go back and forth between the two computers until Avid gets that driver out. So anyway, so that wraps up this one. I hope you found this educational. If you have any questions whatsoever, put them down in the comments below. I'll make sure I respond to every one of them if I can. Also, put some comments down there. Tell me what your experiences are. If you've had problems with hubs in the past, hubs versus docks, remember, big difference. If you've had some problems, or maybe you use them just fine. Maybe you don't have a need for that many additional ports. Maybe you can get by with just two. You're going to find that hard on a laptop, because one of them is going to be needed to charge your laptop or keep it plugged in. So it only leaves you one. So that means if you need two on there, you're going to have to unplug that. And then, of course, when the battery dies, you're not going to be doing any more recording until you get that bad boy charged up again. So kind of keep that in mind, too, when you're talking about these laptops. So hopefully the next version of the MacBook Pro will include some additional ports, include an HDMI and an SD card reader, to really minimize where if they do that, you just simply don't need one of these if you're taking it out to go. Maybe you're doing remote recording or something like that, or maybe you're just doing schoolwork or work when you work on your computer and you take it out and do whatever. Maybe you're mixing out on the road and you do that, and then you come back home and connect everything back up. However you're using it, regardless, hopefully they'll put those in, some expanded ports on the next generation of these to be able to eliminate that, so only you need the dock. So anyway, if you like what you see here on this channel, I appreciate it. If you like and subscribe and hit that notification bell down below, that really helps me out. I'd like to grow this channel if I can, so I can buy more gear back there. Maybe I can get a couple $100s a month and take my wife out to dinner. Who knows? So anyway, my goal is to be able to help people as much as I can. I'm a home project studio guy, just like you guys and girls out there. And so I just share my experiences, what my thoughts are. Doesn't mean I know everything. I definitely do not. I've just happened to learn a few things along the way on my journey. So as you're on your journey, I'm constantly on my journey. So at the end of the day, you know what you should do? You guys should have a nice day. I really do appreciate you watching. I really mean that from the bottom of my heart. Truly, I do. All right? So have a great day, guys. Thank you very much.